Okay, good morning. So where we are now, but just before we start to go again over the Mishnah had told us that there were three different opinions as to how much time you have to say the mitzvah of Shema at night. You have until Tzais, you have until Alois, or you have until the opinion of Rebbe Lezer, which was until the end of the first Ashemira. The Mishnah mentioned, however, only one opinion as to when you are allowed to, or as to when you are permitted to start saying Shema at night, and that was Misha Shakayim Masan, which is Tzeis. So from the Mishnah, we've only had one time that a person was permitted to start saying Shema at night, but then we have three different opinions as to how long they were allowed to say Shema until in the morning. I'm sorry, how long they were allowed to say Shema until at night. And that was either at Sefer Shema Rishayna, at Chatzos, or at Alois. We explained that according to Rebbe Lezer, who hold until the end of the first Shemarit, because V'shachmacha means from when you go to sleep. But according to Rebbe Lezer, Chacham, who say that you have until Chatzos or until the morning, it's because we don't say V'shachmacha when you go to sleep, but V'shachmacha how long people are sleeping. And then we additionally explained that within the Rebbe Lezer, the Chacham could be that even the Chacham agree that B'di Evet, maybe even the Chatchila, but certainly B'di Evet, even the Chacham agree that you could say Shema until the morning, but they wanted to make sure that people would not forget, and so therefore the best way to do that is to say you have until an earlier time, and that would keep people on the straight and narrow. The Gemara then had a discussion about mentioning why we discuss Kriyash Mashal Arvis before we discuss Kriyash Mashal Shachris. The Gemara either because of a Shachim or because of Vayer Vayvoker, that was sufficient of a reason. And then we discussed, additionally, why is it such a weird lashon that we said in the Mishnah, instead of saying that you have until a certain amount of time that you have to start saying Shema at night from the Tzeis, why did we say Mishasha Kaim Mastan? Why not just say that you have a period to start saying Shema at night from when it becomes Tzeis? Why are you telling me like the Kahanim coming to eat Truma? What does that have to do with anything? The Gemara is explaining it to another halacha. As I think halacha, sometimes the Gemara is going to get killed two birds with one stone. You get an option to teach you two things. And that was that we know that when a person was tamei pain, let's say, has to be toivel. So from the moment he's toivel, he's able to eat meiser. That's during the day. Then at night, he's able to eat truma, and then the next morning he brings a carbon, and then he's able to eat actually kachim. And this is the lesson that was being taught, because we have a pasuk, and the pasuk tells us, that we learn out from this pasuk, says the Gemara, that Uva Shemesh v'Toher is referring to the setting of the sun. Then the person becomes tahar. He's able to eat truma, and then the next morning he will bring kachim, and he will go to the mikveh and be able to eat kachim. This, the Gemara said, could have been understood a different way, and that different way would have been that Uva Shemesh v'Toher means that the sun is rising, and the person is going out to bring a carbon, and then he will be able to eat truma. The Gemara says that is not something that we can support in terms of the reading of the pasuk, because it should have said then v'yitaher. Since it doesn't, it's passive. It's mashma that's going on the day. The sun is coming. The sun is setting. It's going away, and the day is gone. V'tar is tiar yoma. It's the discussion in the pasuk is about the sun, not about the person having to do something. Again, as I said, if that works in the simple pshat of the pasuk, is not really our concern. Our concern is the way the Gemara was understanding it, and for halachic purposes, it's understood to be talking about the person, understood to be talking about the day, and not about the person. Good. That was on Daf Beis. On Daf Beis, we discussed this further. It was, the Gemara says that in the West, they didn't have this Rabbi Bar Shila, so instead they had to get this from a brisa, and the brisa which we have, it tells us that when is the time that a person is starting to say Shema, Mishasha Kainim similar davar says Sakechavim. So that's how they knew that the way you interpret the Vah Shemesh V'Tar is a reference to the sun setting, rather than a Vah Shemesh is a reference to the sun rising, and then V'Tar is a reference to the day going away, V'Tiar Yoma, rather than something about the person having to go to Taival himself. This was the beginning of the Gemara in Daf Beis, and then we had a whole discussion, ended up with 6 different opinions as to when you are allowed to actually start saying the Shema. You are allowed to start saying the Shema either from Tzeis, based upon the opinion of Mishra Shakam Rafnat Melech Masan, Mishra Bnei Adam are being Mekadesh the Yom on Shabbos, Mishra Bnei Adam are Nechnat Melech Pita on Erev Shabbos, from Mishra that are Anis Nechel Lechel Nichnas Lechel Pita B'Melach on a regular day, Mishra Bnei Adam Nechnas Lehesev possibly on Erev Shabbos according to one of the opinions of Rashi, right? Or Mishra Shakain and Toivlin. They're actually going to be Toivl themselves. So 6 different opinions as to when the moment is that a person is starting to be required to say the Shema. 6 different opinions. And we said some of them seem like contradictions. There's 2 of them are Meir, 2 of them are Belezer, and that the Gemara said, okay, we can say Treitana Liba de Rameir, Treitana Liba de Belezer. Maybe Belezer in the Mishnah is really not Belezer coming to teach you when you start saying Shema, but maybe only when you finish saying Shema. These are ways of getting out of it. But fundamentally, they're all different times. You might have thought that Ani and Kain were one shir, or Ani and Bnei Adam one shir. No, they're all different times. And what's the actual difference in the times? Relatively small, not necessarily the largest. Along the way, the Gemara had said that maybe there's potentially a proof in the Psukim to teach you when says from Alois that says is actually a day because of the way they used to build when they were coming back to build the second Mesa Mikdash. And the Gemara says that's a good level of proof. It's maybe not 100% of a raya, but it's nevertheless the Gemara is lashon was v'afushin raya l'davar. It's a zecher. It's something. It's a something. I'm not sure if the reason that it's insufficient is because it's coming from Navi, and we the term Kabbalah went out limed lahalacha, but it could also be that we're not 100% sure because maybe there's other psukim as we see throughout that could be also referenced to days. Maybe that's the reason why this was not 100% sufficient. So that's not based on the base. On Gimel Aleph, if you recall what we discussed, was the idea of there being 3 Ashmaris was taken as a given by Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer felt that there were 3 Ashmaris as a davar pashit. And Rabbi Lezer said that during these 3 Ashmaris, after the first one, you no longer are able to say Shema, because he holds only the Zman when people are going to be Shachiv, not during the whole night. So the Gemara then asks on Rabbi Lezer, again, why not just say that you have 4 hours to say Shema? Why are you telling me that you're saying Shema is until the end of the first Ashmara? So we've learned that Rabbi Lezer says that the Ashmaras that are existing in the Shemayim also have Ashmaras on earth. There are signs. And so what he's doing again, he's getting 2 birds with 1 stone. He's telling you that in theory, if you didn't have a watch, you would still know when the end of the first Ashmaras, you would still know when you're no longer able to say the Shema. And what is that sign? The sign was the donkey's braying. It turns out that the donkey's braying in the first Ashmara, the dog's barking in the second, and the children nursing, or the couple talking in the third, those are the 3 signs. Can be understood in practically 2 different times that these things happen. According to one answer of the Gemara, during the end of the first Ashmara, the donkeys bray. During the middle of the second Ashmara, the dogs bark. And during the beginning of the third Ashmara, the children cry. And the benefit of saying it that way, even though it's like, well, why the end, why the middle, like, is frankly, the main benefit of that is that if the donkeys are braying in the end of the first Ashmara, so that's why you can't say, oh, you actually need the simon, you need the ashmara to tell you when the times are, because if it'll be at the beginning of the first ashmara, then why do I need a sign on earth to tell you the donkeys are braying? Just look outside; it became dark, and then you know it's the first ashmara. In the same way, in the end of the last ashmara, you don't need a sign because you know it's daytime. Obviously, it's the end of the ashmara. I don't need a big sign. So Elamai, it's the beginning of the last Ashmar. So again, you wouldn't know that you're in that third Ashmar unless you had that sign. That was one answer of the Gemara. The second answer of the Gemara was that actually these Ashmaras signs are all taking place at the end of each of the first Ashmara and the end of the second and third. So then you don't have a question about the first one, that it's the sign at night, but you do have a question on the third one, is if the kids are crying and the couple is talking, why do we need a sign? It's light outside. And that the Gemara says, but sometimes people are living indoors in a dark room. So they wouldn't necessarily know when to say Shema if they would hear the baby crying, they know that that is now going to be the right time. And what was the idea there? Blazer said that there are three Ashmaris. It's because of the pasuk tells us in Yirmiyah and uses the word shag three times. So that is, as it were, the three different Ashmaris. The Gemara then said that on each Ashmara, Hashem, as it were, is crying for the fact that he had to be destroying the Beis Hamikdash and he had to exile the Jewish people. And that is then leads us to our next conversation in the Gemara. And the next conversation in the Gemara was the idea that Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Shmuel had said that on each Mishmar Hashem is doing this crying, and then we add in Rabbi Yossi says he went to pray in a chorva in Yerushalayim, and he learned three things. One, that you're not supposed to be praying in a chorva. Elio taught him three things. One, you're not supposed to pray in a chorva. Number two, you can daven on the road, Shemona Esrei. And number three, you don't have to daven along tefillah. If you're on the road and you're worried about every drachim, what you should be davening is a tefillah katsar, which in this Gemara means havinenu. On that, we also learn that Rabbi Yossi says that he heard a kol that was also saying the same lashon that Hashem is, as it were, crying for the fact that he had to destroy the Beis Hamikdash, that he had to exile the Jewish people. And on that, the Gemara says that it's not just that Hashem is doing it at the three Mishmaris. Hashem is doing that at more times than that, and not just in the Chorva, but every time the Jewish people say Yesh Me Rabbah, and we didn't say here in the Gemara, but Gemara and Shabbos, you say with say it with Kavana, say it with Kol Ram. Either way, Hashem is saying it there as well. So that was the Gemara here, and the Gemara then discussed what is the fear about going into a Chorva. The Gemara said there was three fundamental things. One is Chshad, one is Batpilis, and one is Mazikin. We're now on Gimel Beis. And those three fears, the Gemara says, we need all three of them, because you can conjure up situations where all three of them are necessary. You can't get rid of one of these fears, right? Sometimes you have a new chorva, so wouldn't necessarily have ma'apela. Sometimes you have two people, so you wouldn't necessarily have shad, depending if they're prutim and they're kshem. Sometimes you would not have to be worried about mazikim. Sometimes, so each one of them is necessary, and therefore we have to discuss all three as possible reasons for why one cannot be praying in a chorva. Then the Gemara brought down to machlokes. Blazer is what we did yesterday. The machlokes as to whether or not there are three mishmars or four mishmars. According to Blazer, when the Mishnah was three mishmars, but Rebbe holds that there are four mishmars. Reb Nosson holds that there are three mishmars. So it seems that those machlokes, Blazer is earlier generations than them. Rebbe Blazer ben Horkin is much earlier. Rebbe is much later. You look at the Gemara in the end of Haris. The Gemara tells us about the machlokes between Rebbe and Rebbe's father, Reb Nosson. So they seem never to have a clear agreement as to what's going on in Shemayim, the machlokes, if there are three or four mishmaris. And the Gemara says that according to Rebbe, that there are four mishmaris, he has a pasuk to give him a proof, and that pasuk was chatzos alayla adiyakim l'cha. David HaMelech is saying about him, so I get up at chatzos and kidma ene ashmaris, and I get up ashmaris, mean I get up two ashmaris early. So what that meant then is that there must be four ashmaris. If David HaMelech is getting up at 12, and he's getting up two ashmaris early, well then 12 to 3, 3 to 6. It makes perfect sense according to Rebbe. But according to Rabbi Nosson, that like Rabbi Lezer holds that there are only three ashmaris. So he has to try to explain that pasuk. But what's his major proof? His major proof is from Gideon, that when Gideon went to war, the pasuk told us that Vayova Gideon ish asher ita b'ksei machane roish ha'ashmaris hapichayne. He went to the middle of ashmara. So obviously the middle of ashmara must mean, in order to have a middle, you have to have a beginning and an end. How do you have a middle without a beginning and an end? So there must be three ashmaris, and that was the middle ashmara when Gideon went to fight in his attack there against Midian. So that, and then Rabbi has to explain what do you do with that. Then the Gemara continued, and we went now on a topic that had nothing to do halachically, nothing to do anything with the previous Gemaras, but it was the same man, the Amram, who had said over the member before. So we wanted to say something over from these folks, and that was the idea of ein omer b'fnei hameis ela dvar shel meis. We don't say over in front of the deceased only things that relate to this season. And then we have machlokes in the Gemara. The Gemara brought down, what about divrei Torah mina the alma? How does that work? So divrei Torah, you agree that you're not supposed to say in front of the mace, and that's because of Loig Rosh. And we explained the whole thing about Loig Rosh yesterday. So now, if you say divrei Torah, you're not allowed to say in front of a mace because mace can't learn. So now, what happens about Mila de Alma? So one opinion says, well, if you can't say over Dvar Shel Mace because of Loig Rosh, But things that are not related to, that are milad alma, that's not a problem. No one says, no, kal v'chomer, you shouldn't say over innocuous things, like it's irrelevant, only things that have to do with the maze. So that's the two different opinions. And then we discussed as well the idea that David HaMelech got up at half the night, that David HaMelech got up by Chatzos, because the Pasuk had told us, Chatzos Laila Akim L'cha. David HaMelech says, I'm getting up at Chatzos. So the Gemara discussed, did David really get up at Chatzos? David HaMelech really got up right in the beginning of the evening, because it says, Kedamti Baneshef. So which one is it? So the Gemara then says, maybe David HaMelech got up at the earlier point, in a sense that he was still dozing, but later on he got up strong, fully, or maybe the Gemara says that maybe sometimes he overslept. He didn't always get up that time, but he never slept past Chatzos. Maybe it was different types of learning that he did before Chatzos. He did Divrei Torah. Afterwards, he did Shiras Brachos. All different ideas of what David HaMelech did during his nighttime. As we made the joke, it's not the kind of thing to say about us, right? This is what the Chazal were worried about. What is David HaMelech doing? The kind of level of a king that he was. We'll see more about him today. Then the Gemara said, maybe there's a difference about Neshef, a discussion if Neshef is the day or the evening. And we said there's two types of Neshef. The Gemara wanted to then know, how did David know that it's Chatzos? How could David know that it's Chatzos if Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know that it's Chatzos? And the Gemara said that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he said Kach Chatzos, Halayla, instead of saying Chatzos, is Hashem didn't tell him Kach Chatzos, Hashem said Chatzos. So then the answer was that how could David know better? David knew better because he had a special harp, and that special harp would play over his bed at that time. And then the Gemara concluded with a bit of it. I got it to point about David HaMelech when he got up. People would come in to tell him about the fact that the Jewish people don't have enough parnasa, and he would say, okay, let's go to war and let's make a parnasa happen that way. If you can't do it internally, they do it artificially and expand the business by taking over some neighboring countries. And that is where we are today. Dalal Amnal says the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Zera says the following. So we're continuing what we said yesterday in our discussion of David HaMelech and when he used to get up at night. Did he know about Chatzos or not? Says Rabbi Zera Amar, Moshe Lo'il Mavi Yada, Moshe Rabbeinu. For sure, Chas v'shalom, you see, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know Chatzos was. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu knew when Chatzos was. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Kach Chatzos halal, and Yitzhak B'tzek Mitzrayim. We're going to go at Kach Chatzos, not Chatzos. So Rabbi Zera has to answer that. So Rabbi Zera Amar, Moshe Lo'il Mavi Yada, David Nami Havi Yada. Everyone knew when Chatzos was. They didn't have watches, but everyone knew when Chatzos was because these are very special people. Says the Gemara. So if Moshe Rabbeinu knew and David HaMelech knew, so I ask you a question. Why is it that David HaMelech needed a harp playing over his bed with a north wind coming at Chatzos precisely for what? Says the Gemara, it's Pashut. The cave when the David Haviyad the Kinar Lamali. Why did David need a Kinar over his bed if he knew when Chatzos was? After the Gemara, let's Ure Mishnase in order to wake him up. Pashut. He didn't need a Kinar over his bed to tell him when it's Chatzos. So he needed a Kinar over his bed to be an alarm clock. Says the Gemara, "V'kev and the Moshe Aviyad the Lamalei Lemeimer Kachatzos." Fair thing more than if Moshe Rabbeinu knows what Chatzos is, so why does he say Kachatzos? Let him say Chatzos. Says the Gemara, "Kasav Hashem Yitu." It's Tanine Paroi. The astrologers of Paroi, right? The astronomers, the people that are advising Paroi, the Chacham Chashmim, who are advising Paroi. You know what they're going to say? They're going to say, "V'yer Moshe Badoyu." They're going to say Moshe Rabbeinu was wrong. The Omar Mar Lama L'Shain Chameir Loimar. You should teach your tongue to say any idea that you don't know, because maybe you might get caught up and get into a web of deceit, and you're going to mamish get stuck. So what are we talking about here? Two things. Number one, Moshe Rabbeinu has to say kachatzos because the people of Paro are going to say, oh, no, he got it wrong. What's the problem? You have to understand that the argument between Parai and the Rebbeinu Shalom is not an argument as to whether or not there is a Jewish God who is very powerful. Already in the Makkah of Canaan, Parai said, Etzba lekimhi. If you look at the beginning, when Moshe Rabbeinu goes to Parai to ask the Jewish people to be released, what is the response of Parai? Lo yadanti es Hashem. I don't know who your God is. Right? And as the Medrash expounds on it, Parai said, let's bring out all our God books. And they're like turning the pages, leafing through, and we don't see it. We don't know. Already by Keenum, he knows. There's no doubt about that he knows. And he says throughout, Hashem Tzadik, V'ani V'ami HaRishoyim. Again, he's telling the Jewish people he acknowledges the existence of the Rebbeinu Shalom. But look at there in the Makkah of Dever, and you'll see something fascinating. After the Makkah of Dever, the pasuk is Vayishlach Parai v'hinei lo meis mimiknei b'nei Yisrael ad echad. Parai sends out after the Makkah of Dever to check whether or not any animal, one, died by the Jews. Who cares? It's one. You look at the Egyptians. They had a whole slew of animals that passed away. And you're worried if he's sending out by the Jews to find out if the Jews had anybody? Because if even one animal died by the Jews, then that means that their God is not so powerful. The Hiflo Hashem. Hashem made a separation between the Yidden and the non-Jews. And if there was even a shemetz that he could say, oh, then it means that God is not as infinitely powerful as you say. So if Moshe Rabbeinu said chatzos and all the Becharim died, but it happened at 12:01, it loses the whole power. So if one of the Itzadidei power is the wrong time on his watch, it's going to say Moshe Badayu, and the power of the Makkah is not going to be felt. This is the answer, Sir Zero, as to why Moshe Rabbeinu said Kachatzos instead of saying Chatzos. Rav Ashi Amar. Rav Ashi has a different understanding of why Moshe Rabbeinu said Kachatzos and not Chatzos. What's Rav Ashi's answer? Rav Ashi Amar Bepalgo Urta the Tleis and Agebe. So it was on the middle of the night of the 13th, going into the 14th. Habikoi. V'Hachi Kamar Moshe Elisha. Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to the Jewish people. Omar Kodesh Baruch Hu Lemachar Kachatzos Halayla Kiyodim. Tomorrow night at this time, like tonight. And I'm going to bring you the Maggis Bechor. So again, does that fit into the Pshat? If you look there in the Psukim, you'll see it's a bit odd the way the Psukim appear. It doesn't say clearly Moshe Rabbeinu is in Paro's palace. He's out of Paro's palace when the warning happened. If you look carefully there in Parashas Boy, and you will see how Rav Ashi gets the ability to make the suggestion about maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to the Jewish people, and Kachat says here is not being worried about the Istagmine Paroi. Kachat says is telling the Jews, hey, tomorrow, the same time, like tonight, this is going to happen. And that's why I said Kachatzos. Pashat is referring to the night. Next night is going to be like tonight. That is the end of that discussion. Now we go back to discussing David HaMelech and his tremendous tzidkah. Says the Gemara, David shomer nafshi ki chaserani. David's saying to the Rebbeinu Shalom that he should be protected. Why? Because he's a big chassid. What is the big chassidus that he did? Levi Rabbi Yitzchak, machlokes. God Omar, Kach Omar David Fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One man Omar says that this is what David said to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Rebbeinu Shalom, chaserani. He said, am I not a chassid? Right? Shekol Malchim Mizrach U'Ma'ariv. All the other kings, all my competition, they're all sleeping, mamish. You know, like the Mishnah is going to tell us later on tests. They sleep until the third hour. They're mamish relaxed. They sleep like kings. And I'm getting up mamish in order to be able to sing your praises. She says, I'm a chassid. David HaMelech is telling the Rebbeinu who's a chassid. This also should remind you of another Gemara that unfortunately led to David HaMelech's issue with Vasheva, which David HaMelech said, how can we say, okay, I got la giva. We say, okay, Abraham, okay, Yitzchak, okay, Yaakov, right? Okay, I got la giva. And we say, Mogen Avraham, and David HaMelech said to the Rebbeinu Shalom, 1 second. Why do we say, okay, Abraham, okay, Yitzchak, okay, Yaakov? And we said, Mogen Avraham, maybe there should be David in there. And the Rebbeinu said, okay, listen, this is how it works. Basically, these guys, they got in there because they got some big tests. You want to get there, we're going to give you a big test. And he had the big test. It didn't work out that well. And therefore, we never changed to be able to include David HaMelech there. So this is saying in a similar vein that David HaMelech also thought that he's a big chassid. And again, there are two ways to judge a person, right? We have in last week's parsha, right? Noach is tzaddik tamay of deirasav. That's the big tzaddik. You're judging Noach relative to Noach. No, you're judging Noach relative to Avram. In the generation of Noach compared to the other members of the antediluvian era, he's the biggest tzaddik. He's deserving of being saved. But in the generation of Avram Avinu, maybe he's not, not to be noticed. This David HaMelech is saying, compare me to all the other kings, and you will see a fundamental difference. I am getting up to sing the praises of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and all these kings are sleeping late, and they're clearly not in this league. V'idach, The other Mandamar says, what is David HaMelech saying about his chassidus? What is his big chassidus? Kach Amar David Pnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ben Shalom Lo Chassidani? He says, am I not a chassid? Shekol Malchei Mizrach U'Ma'ariv Yoshim HaGudas HaGudas B'Chvoidam. All the other kings, what do? They sit in their throne room, they have a royal retinue, they have a mamish procession in honor of themselves. What am I? I am sitting around passing halachic shilas, getting my hands dirty in terms of deciding these questions, and even need the questions. Nothing is too small for me, says David. In order to mature husband. But like, oh, right, and that's fundamentally important. In fact, the Gemara tells on Shabbos, and hey, that the famous lesson of Shimon Nachmani, Rabbi Yonason, that he says that Kol Omer XYZ is chayt is any elatayah, right? He says one of them about David, Kol Omer David chayt any elatayah. Why? Because they used to give a get when they would go fight. Or he was divorced when he went to go fight before the whole mice to fine. But one of the examples that the Gemara talks about is Kol Omer b'nei Eli chata. Anybody who says that the children of Eli were chayte, it's any elatayah. And that was the destruction of Mishkan Shiloh, which had lasted for hundreds of years. Why is it that we're going to say that they did maybe it was a mistake, but it was certainly not that they were mamash vayishkivun the nashim that came. Says the Gemara, what happened was that they were in such a rush. So the ladies came late. You ever been to the post office? You come at 4:30. They're ready to. You can't get in. Why? Because 5:00 is coming. We don't want to take a chance, a possibility that somebody's going to be coming at 4:59. Government workers, they have a perfect way to manage it. They always stop early so that they don't have to work a moment late. So what happened was, they were like administrative people, like Mishkan Shila is closing at 5. You brought in your carpet now at 4:59. It's not coming in today. You got to wait till tomorrow. So because of that, they couldn't become tired. They couldn't go back to their husbands. And so because they made them wait, that's considered to be as though they were having a znus. And that is what David HaMelech is saying over here. How important it is to be that he spent his time, even though he's a king, and even though he should be deserving a royal retinue and sitting in his throne room. No, he did all this work in order to ensure that women can become tar. Everything that I do, I nevertheless check with my Rabbi Mephibosheth. Rabbi Mephibosheth is a very interesting name. We can't get into so much now, but if you look in Tanakh, you will see the people names like Ishbosheth, Mephibosheth, Yerubosheth. Why were the names like this? So the real reason, it seems to be, as a matter of pshat, is that the real names were Baal, Yeru Baal, Ish Baal, Mifi Baal. They named their names after idols. How could it be? I can't get into now, but as a sort of another way to see these names, we are looking at it as Boishas, right? Because they were named after an idol, so we say it's from the mouth of Boishas. And then the Gemara is giving you a different approach over here. And why was his Rabbi a Mifi Boishas, like a mouth is full of shame? What does it have to do with shame? So it's not because of what I just said, rather a different reason. Mifi Boishas Rabbi, Yafa Danti, Yafa Chayavti, Yafa Zechisi, Yafa Tiarti, Yafa Timesi, V'loi Boishti. And he says, I would ask my Rabbi, did I do a good job on this psak? Did I do a good job on that psak? And I was not ashamed. I was not embarrassed to ask my Rebbe, even though I'm the king and he's essentially my subject. Nevertheless, he was my Rebbe. Continues the Gemara. The Gemara is adding on an additional point to David HaMelech and his incredible tzidkus, despite being a king. What does it mean in pasuk that David HaMelech is saying about himself that I talk about your commandments, opposite the kings, and I'm not embarrassed. I'm not ashamed. His name wasn't Mephibosheth. His name was really Ishbosheth. And why is he called Mephibosheth? From his mouth is shame. Because he was such a massive Talmid Chacham that he would make David look bad, right? I mean, it's not his fault if he's a massive Talmid Chacham. Just because he's a king's subject, he can still say, but the Gemara says like this, or Chazal said like that, or where did you come up with this? That is partial. You need to always be free in order to be able to learn, and that's what happened. He had the freedom to be able to say what he wanted in front of David, and David didn't get angry about it. It's Torah, and he would embarrass David in halacha. So that's what it means. That's why it was called Mephibosheth. From his mouth came busha for David. But it would be funny though if that was his given name, right? When he had nothing, when he was a baby, and before he ever knew David HaMelech. So as I said, the way The Pshat understands what I just said, and this is Chazal's additional understanding of how he got the name Mephibosheth. Okay, continues the Gemara. Says the Gemara as follows: Lefikach. Therefore, Zacha David v'yatza mimenu Kilev. David HaMelech was zeichet to have a son like Kilev. Who was the son Kilev? So the Gemara says, "V'amar Rabbi like Kilev Shmuel, Daniel Shmuel." That wasn't his real name. His real name was Daniel, but he was very special. This boy. Why? V'lamar Shmuel Kilev Shoyim Mechalim Pnei Mephibosheth Ba'alacha. Because David HaMelech, as the word, got his just desserts. Right? He got he got his ability to take back the honor that he had lost by being embarrassed by Mephibosheth with his son. David HaMelech had a son Kilev, who was a massive Talmid Chacham and was even better than Mephibosheth, and would embarrass Mephibosheth, not because again of his royal stature as a prince, but because of the fact that he was just better, even better than Mephibosheth. The love Amar Shlem v'Chachmas, and this is what Shlem Melech was referring to in his wisdom. B'ni im Chacham libecha yismach libi gamani. My son, if you are wise, right? Im Chacham libecha, if you have a wise heart, my heart will be very happy as well. So David Melech had a big nachas from having a son who was so smart. The Omer, we have additional pasuk Chacham b'ni b'samach libi v'ashiv v'charpi davar. Right, my son, the wise person, my heart is very happy, and he's going to be able to respond to those that are being mecharif me, those that are making fun of me. My very smart son can be able to respond to them. And David Melech had that chus to be able to have a son with such a big Talmid Chacham that he was able to be responding to Mephibosheth, to Ishbosheth, who otherwise made David look bad in terms of halacha. Okay, good. So now the Gemara goes back on this question. We had just said, David Shamar Nafshi Kichasadani. He said to the Ben Shalom, Hashem, please watch over me because I'm a big chassid. So the Gemara asks, David Mikar Nafshi Chassid. Would David talk about himself in such a way? Would David say about himself that he's such a chassid, that he's such a righteous person? Well, we have another pasuk. The pasuk tells us, Lulei Amanti Lurish B'tuv Hashem Beretz Chayim. Right, we know Eretz Chaim is a basic forest, but that David HaMelech here is referring to L'asad Lava, he's referring to Gan Eden, he's referring to celestial life. So David HaMelech is saying, like, would it only be that I should be Zeicha to see the glory of the Rebbeinu Shalom in the land of the living? Meaning, after Me'eva Esrim, I should be Zeicha to be able to get to Gan Eden. So what does that sound like? That sounds like David's not very sure if he's going to be able to get to Gan Eden. The Tana Mishmei Rabbi Yosi, Lama Nakara Lule. Why do we have dots over the word Lule? Now, dots over words is a very interesting topic when it comes to the Chumash. Dots over the words is a Zaytik topic we don't have time to go into now. We'll just say over one quick thing, which is dots over the words, and we have it a few times in the Chumash, 10 places, and at one of the most famous places we're going to have in Parshas Vayishlach, right, when the Esav and Yaakov are going to meet with each other, and the pasuk says that when he kisses him, Vayisha cares a lot of dots. Fine. So we all know all the drash on all the dots, but there is a few midrashim that say why are the dots written? The dots and the Chumash are written according to these midrashim by Ezra, who put on the dots on the word because he wasn't sure what the word was. He put on the dots, and he says that when Moshe Rabbeinu comes back, he's either going to say my writing, my word was correct, and we will remove the dots, or we will change it and take away. But the dots are there to symbolize that it was unsure by Ezra. Moshe writes that these midrashim are forgeries, and the tshuva, famous tshuva, where Moshe was writing about what we call today lower Bible criticism. But that's all in relation to the Chumash. What about dots in the words that comes in the Navi? It comes in the Ksuvim. So on that, that is not considered in the same level of issue, but nevertheless, it's still there to teach us something. What is it there to teach us? So it's clear, says the Gemara, that this is meant that you should think, it's not done about saying, would that it only be, zecha to this in the sense that he's talking humbly or excitedly about the future where he's going to be zecha to have this incredible vegas with the Rebbeinu Shalom, but fundamentally, is he really zecha? Lule amanti, would I only be? Maybe I'm not really zecha. So that is the way the dots may be signifying that he's not sure about himself. The Tanah B'Shmei Rav Yossi Lama Nagar Lule Amar Davel Fnei Kadosh Baruch Hu Benish Lamuvtach Ani B'Chash Atam Sham Schar Tov Tzadikim La'asad Lavai. I know that you're going to repay the tzaddikim La'asad Lavai with the good that you promised. Aval Ani Yedem Yesh Chelik B'Neim Im Lav. But I don't know if I, nevertheless, have that ability to be one of them. Am I a tzaddik? So it's not humbleness; it's real. David Melch's not sure about himself. So the Gemara is asking, how could David say about himself with such a big thing? David saying, "David Shomer Nafshi Chasadani." He's saying we should watch me because I'm great. I'm a big chassid. He's not sure. Says the Gemara, Teretz Shem Yigar Machet. Maybe you'll be. David Melch was sure when he said, "David Shomer Nafshi Chasadani." He was sure, but he was afraid. Luli Amanti. Maybe I'm going to one day sin. I'm going to one day sin. I'm not going to be zeicha to it. I wish I will be zeicha. But he's afraid maybe one day sin will cause him not to be zeicha. In a similar way, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi Rami. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi makes the following steer in the psukim, but the following is like this. By Yaakov Avinu, the pasuk says that Hashem said to Yaakov Avinu, "V'hine nechim shmartichum b'chol asher telech." And Yaakov Avinu was promised during Parsha Vayetze, during the whole dream about the ladder and the malachim, Ha'ilim v'Yarden by. So Yaakov Avinu was promised that Hashem says to him, "I'm going to watch you on the journey. On the journey you're going, I'm going to be with you." But then the pasuk says, then the pasuk says that Yaakov was very afraid. Why was Yaakov very afraid? There are commentaries that say, we don't have time to explain now, but there are commentaries that say that Yaakov was afraid. Yaakov's fear was wrong. There are those commentaries that want to suggest that Yaakov Avinu was wrong. This was a sin for Yaakov Avinu to be afraid. He shouldn't have been afraid. He should have known that Hashem had promised him that he's going to be okay. On that, what do you call it? The Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi is answering no. That when Hashem had promised Yaakov Avinu was before 20 years ago. Hashem promised him he was going to be with him, and in fact, he did well by love. And in the end, he came out. Yeah, it was a little bit of a trouble with the wives and the salary kept on changing. But in the end, he comes out with all the wives and all the family and all of the money and the cattle and such that he had. It was a big success in the end. So, but why is he afraid? It says Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, why is he so afraid? Because of the fact Shema Yigar Machet. Because maybe he sinned. And if he sinned, then he wouldn't be deserving of the fact that Hashem should watch him in this big ultimate battle with Esav. Ketanya, as we have a price that it says Ad Yavar Amcha Hashem Ad Yavar Zukanisa. 2 times we have Ad Yavar in the Az Yashir that Hashem is, as it were, going to watch over the Jewish people as they're passing over this nation that he has acquired. Ad Yavar, the Gemara is saying now in a Drush way. What does it mean? These 2 Ad Yavars is Ad Yavar Hashem Zubi Rishayna. Well, the first Ad Yavar is referring to when the Jewish people come in to the land of Israel the first time, and Ad Yavar Zukanisa Zubi Yishni. That's the second time the Jewish people come to the land of Israel, meaning after the 70 years of exile of Bavel. The Jewish people were really deserving of having Nisim in the time of Ezra. But the reason it didn't have Nisim in the second bias, and the reason it didn't have Nisim when they came back the second time, was because of the Chet. Now, if you look at the Gemara Yuma Chav Tes, the Gemara over there tells a different reason why the Jewish people didn't have the Jewish people don't have Nisim anymore, because already by the Megillah Esther they don't have Nisim, right? That's what the pasuk tells us that Esther is Lamatzach Aliyasa Shachar Lama Nimshal Esther Le Shachar Lama Nimshal Esther La Ayal. What is this coming to teach you? That Esther said when she went in to Achashverosh, she said Eli Eli Lama Zavtan. She said over this Lamatzach Aliyasa Shachar. So the Gemara said Ma Shachar Seif Kol Lailaf Esther Seif Kol Hanisim. So Nisim already finished b'mei Esther. It wasn't a Vod Hashem Yigar Machet. It's a fundamental, I think. Like we look, the Gemara tells us in Yom Samach Tes that already by the second bias they don't want to have anybody Yitzhar Avodah Zarah. So they lost the Nisim, they lost the Nevi, they lost things. So this will be a different understanding of that maybe they would have been Zaycha to the Nisim, but because of Chet they didn't. So therefore, being afraid of Chet is something that one ought to be fearful of. And now we've just finished one quick word on the Chumash. So we said in last 6 parsha, Neach was a big tzaddik, and he walked with God. In this 6 parsha, we learn about the difference in the Jewish people. That Avraham Avinu was told, "His halech lefanai ve'yetamim, walk before me." Neach was a big tzaddik, but the reason he never gets to Avram's level is because he always walks with the Rebbeinu Shalom. They walk with the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Jewish people's job in life is not to walk with the Rebbeinu Shalom, but his halech lefanai, keep the tmimas, but walk ahead of me. You, as it were, get the agency. We get the ability to walk before God. That means we get the ability to make decisions, and hopefully in that way to be able to do things on our own and have the human being grow and not just simply always be a follower. Have a wonderful Shabbos.